On automotive forums, you often hear complaints that cars used to be designed by engineers, while today they are designed by marketers, and that everything was better in the past. The Fiat Multipla is a perfect example of what happens when functionality is given priority over conventional ideas of automotive design. The car was packed with interesting and even revolutionary solutions, and almost every strange feature of its appearance existed for a practical reason. But instead of becoming a revolutionary car, the Multipla spent years appearing on countless lists of the ugliest cars ever made. Yet the story of how it was created is far more interesting than simply arguing about its looks. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. The first Fiat to carry the Multipla name appeared back in 1956. The Fiat 600 Multipla was based on the small rear-engined Fiat 600, but instead of simply making the body larger, the engineers almost completely rethought how the available space was used. The driver and front passenger were pushed as far forward as possible, almost directly above the front axle, leaving more room for the passenger compartment. As a result, despite being only about 3.5 meters long, the Multipla could carry up to 6 people in 3 rows, and also offered considerable interior flexibility. Many, including Stellantis itself, regard it as the first true minivan. Even so, the original Multipla failed to turn this concept into a separate mass market class of vehicle. Mass car ownership in Europe was only beginning to take off, and for many families, even buying a conventional car was still a major expense. The Multipla also cost considerably more than a standard Fiat 600. Buyers were being asked to pay roughly 25% extra for a very unusual vehicle powered by the same small engine. And despite its clever interior, the Multipla also had some significant drawbacks. With all 3 rows of seats in use, there was almost no room left for luggage. In other words, this was not yet the kind of family minivan that, almost 30 years later, could carry a large family, take all their luggage, and comfortably travel halfway across Europe. Everything changed in 1984, with the arrival of the Renault Espace. At around 4.25 meters long, it could carry up to 7 people, while its interior could be completely rearranged depending on the journey. The 5 rear seats were individual and removable. They could be repositioned or taken out completely, while the front seats could swivel to face the rear. As a result, the Espace could easily change from a 7-seat family vehicle into a car with a huge cargo area, or even something resembling a small living room on wheels. At first, the new concept took some time to find buyers, and sales started rather slowly. But it soon became clear just how much flexibility the Espace offered. The first generation eventually sold almost 192,000 units, and the Espace effectively created the European minivan market, with these vehicles increasingly attracting family buyers who might otherwise have chosen traditional station wagons. The minivan class developed rapidly, and interiors became increasingly flexible. But at some point, minivans became victims of their own success. With each new generation, they grew larger, more complex, and more expensive. The first generation Espace was around 4.25 meters long, while the third generation, introduced in 1996, had grown by almost 30 centimeters. The Grand Espace that followed was even longer than the Mercedes Vito of the same period, a vehicle that belonged to the van class. Space was still not a problem, but one of the original advantages of the minivan was gradually being lost: the ability to provide maximum interior room within relatively compact exterior dimensions. Manufacturers understood this too, and interestingly, Renault was once again among the first to offer a solution. In 1991, the company presented the Scenic concept. The name was an acronym for Safety Concept Embodied in a New Innovative Car. 5 years later, the production Megane Scenic arrived. Based on the compact Megane, it was around 4.2 meters long, offered 5 individual seats, extensive interior flexibility, and a considerably lower price than larger minivans. And if the Espace had once created the market for large European MPVs, the Scenic effectively did the same for the compact class. The first generation sold almost 2.8 million units. Around the same time, Fiat was developing its own idea of a compact minivan. The company had no intention of simply repeating the formula of the future Scenic, and in any case, Work on the Multipla had begun long before the production French model made its debut. Fiat wanted to take the idea much further and create a car that could change the way people thought about compact minivans. The engineers were given a demanding brief: fit 6 people and their luggage into a car no more than 4 meters long. At first, Fiat considered the obvious 2 plus 2 plus 2 layout, with 3 rows of 2 seats. But within such compact dimensions, the third row consumed almost all of the luggage space, while the car itself became too tall and narrow. The engineers eventually came up with a much more unusual solution: eliminate the third row entirely and place 3 people in each of 2 rows. This 3 plus 3 layout became the foundation of the Multipla. 3 individual seats in the front and 3 more in the rear allowed it to carry 6 people while still providing a proper luggage compartment. The rear seats could also be repositioned, folded, or removed completely, allowing the Multipla to become almost a small cargo vehicle when needed. To make sure 3 people could actually sit comfortably side by side, rather than simply fit into the same row, the Multipla had to be unusually wide. It was only 3.99 meters long, but 1.87 meters wide, almost the same width as a Mercedes Vito of the same period. The Vito, though, was nearly 67 centimeters longer. By modern standards, the dashboard looks rather strange. But once again, maximum functionality dictated the design. Instead of a conventional instrument cluster directly in front of the driver, the instruments were grouped into a separate unit closer to the center and angled slightly toward the driver. Next to them were the climate controls and a high-mounted gear lever. The position of the gear lever was particularly important. A conventional floor-mounted lever would have interfered with the center passenger, while this arrangement kept the space between the 3 front seats clear. The result looked rather chaotic, but functionality once again came first. The instruments and controls the driver needed were grouped together, while the rest of the dashboard could be used for numerous shelves and storage compartments. The Multipla's interior reflected the philosophy of the entire car. Conventional ideas of beauty were never allowed to take priority over functionality and the need to use every inch of interior space as efficiently as possible. The same approach was applied to the exterior. Fiat kept the hood low and the windshield tall and almost vertical. This created the unusual horizontal section between them that became one of the Multipla's most distinctive features. The high-beam headlights were placed there, while the low beams and fog lights sat lower down. As a result, even one of the most controversial elements of the Multipla's appearance was directly connected to its unusual layout and functional logic. Technically, the Multipla was far more conventional than its layout suggested. It had front-wheel drive, a transversely mounted engine, McPherson struts at the front, and independent rear suspension. Many components were shared with other Fiat models, which helped keep the cost of such an unusual car within reasonable limits. At launch, buyers could choose between a 1.6-liter gasoline engine producing 103 horsepower and a modern, for the time, 1.9 JTD diesel with common rail injection, producing 105 horsepower. Fiat also offered factory Blue Power and Bi-Power versions using natural gas. The tanks were mounted beneath the floor, so they took up almost no passenger or luggage space. Fiat presented the Multipla concept back in 1996, while the production car reached the market in 1998. The reaction was extremely mixed. The automotive press and the design community quickly recognized just how cleverly the car had been engineered. They praised its 6 full-size seats, enormous interior for a car only 4 meters long, useful luggage space, and flexible seating. In 1999, the Multipla even appeared in a MoMA exhibition devoted to cars for the next century. In 2000, it was named Top Gear Car of the Year, and then won Top Gear's Best Family Car Award 3 years in a row. Ordinary buyers were much less enthusiastic about the new Fiat's appearance. The distinctive step below the windshield, the headlights arranged at several different levels, the unusual width, and the almost vertical body made the Multipla instantly recognizable. But not in the way Fiat had hoped. Instead of becoming the new standard for compact minivans, it quickly became a regular feature in jokes and lists of the world's ugliest cars. Sales of the Multipla started slowly. It performed reasonably well in Italy, but results elsewhere were much weaker. The United Kingdom is particularly revealing. In 2000, Just 3,145 Multiplas were sold there, compared with 32,560 Renault Scenics and 21,582 Vauxhall Zefiras, a far more conventional car both inside and out. Sales were weak enough that by 2004, Fiat introduced a major facelift, and in my view, made a serious mistake. The famous step disappeared, the front end became completely conventional, and in doing so, Fiat effectively rejected its own original idea. The first Multipla already had its own group of buyers, people who had chosen this strange car, accepted its appearance, and perhaps defended that choice more than once. A few years later, Fiat itself almost seemed to give their critics a reason to say that, yes, the design really had been a failure. In my view, it would have made far more sense to preserve the Multipla's character and simply soften its most controversial features than to abandon the original concept so dramatically. Between 1998 and 2010, around 344,000 Multiplas were produced. That cannot be called a complete failure, but it was hardly a major success either, especially when the first-generation Scenic alone sold almost 2.8 million units. A new generation of the Multipla never appeared. Fiat did not abandon the idea of a compact and spacious family car, but it returned to the concept in a much more conventional form. In 2012, the 500L appeared with a conventional 5-seat layout, followed later by the 7-seat 500L Living. It is also telling that Fiat abandoned the Multipla name and chose instead to associate the new model with the far more successful 500 family. The Multipla itself remains a great example of how a good idea can be undermined by just a few decisions. And the next time someone argues that cars used to be designed by engineers and are now designed by marketers, the Multipla is worth remembering. Because it was, perhaps, one of those cars of its generation in which engineering logic shaped almost everything.